In 1941, Germany launched the largest invasion in human history. Its army had already crushed Poland and France with speed and precision. At the center of that success was the Panzer III, Germany's main battle tank. Reliable, effective, and more than enough for anything Europe had to offer. But on the Eastern Front, it met something completely different: the Soviet T-34, a tank that was faster, better armored, and far more powerful. And suddenly, Germany's most important tank wasn't just outdated, it was outmatched. So how did the Panzer III go from the backbone of Blitzkrieg to a machine that couldn't keep up with the war it was meant to win? Despite Germany's defeat in World War I and the restrictions imposed by the Treaty of Versailles, which prohibited the country from maintaining armored forces, work on armored vehicles had already begun as early as 1925. The first tank to eventually enter mass production was the Panzer I, originally developed under the codename Kleintractor, small tractor, with its design process starting in 1930. However, the limitations of the Panzer I were evident even during its design stage. It had a two-man crew, was armed only with machine guns, and possessed merely bulletproof armor. As a result, the Reichswehr Armaments Office soon formulated the requirement for heavier and more capable tanks. According to Krupp Company documents from 1933, the Armaments Office planned the development of two new vehicles. One slightly larger than the Panzer I and armed with a 20mm gun, later becoming the Panzer II, with development assigned to Daimler-Benz. And another tank weighing around 10 tons and armed with a 37mm gun, for which Krupp intended to secure the development contract. The final decision to proceed with the development of these two vehicles was made following a meeting of the Armaments Office leadership on January 11, 1934, where priority programs were determined under conditions of limited funding. Formal authorization to begin work on the new tank, designated Gefechtskampfwagen combat tank, was granted to the Armored Troops Inspectorate on January 27th of the same year. The development of the Panzerkampfwagen III began in February 1934, when the German Armaments Office organized a competition for a new tank under the codename Zugführerwagen, Platoon Commander's Vehicle, abbreviated as ZW. After evaluating the capabilities of the German industry, 4 companies were invited to participate: Daimler-Benz, Krupp, MAN, and Rheinmetall. The technical requirements specified a vehicle with a mass of approximately 10 tons, armed with a 37mm gun mounted in a fully rotating turret, and capable of achieving a maximum speed of no less than 40 kilometers per hour. The tank was to be equipped with a Maybach HL-100 engine rated at 300 horsepower, combined with an SSG-75 transmission produced by Zahnradfabrik Friedrichshafen, a Wilson-Klettrack steering mechanism. Following the evaluation of preliminary designs submitted by Daimler-Benz, MAN, and Rheinmetall, the Armaments Office issued contracts for prototype production in the summer of 1934. Daimler-Benz was tasked with producing 2 chassis prototypes. MAN received an order for 1 chassis prototype. Krupp was assigned 2 turret prototypes, and Rheinmetall was commissioned to produce 1 turret prototype. After testing, the Daimler-Benz chassis was selected as the basis for further development, with the first prototype completed in August 1935. In addition to the initial chassis prototypes designated ZW1 and ZW2, Daimler-Benz received a contract to produce 2 improved prototypes, ZW3 and ZW4. The 2 turret prototypes developed by Krupp had already been completed by August 1934, but the final decision in their favor was made only after comparative testing against Rheinmetall turret designs mounted on the prototype chassis. The Panzerkampfwagen III was developed as Germany's primary medium tank, with its early evolution beginning in December 1935, when an order was issued for a pre-series of 25 vehicles intended for troop trials, with deliveries planned between October 1936 and April 1937. The designation was finalized as Panzerkampfwagen III on April 3, 1936. The initial production batches, known as Serie ZW, included Ausführung A, B, C, and D, all produced by Daimler-Benz, with components supplied by multiple subcontractors such as Krupp and Deutsche Edelstahlwerke. The Ausführung A, 1th Series ZW, consisted of 10 tanks built in 1937, featuring a suspension with 5 large road wheels and vertical springs, weighing 15 tons and reaching 35 kilometers per hour, below requirements. The Ausführung B, Tooth Series ZW, also from 1937, introduced a redesigned suspension with 8 small road wheels in bogies with leaf springs and hydraulic shock absorbers. 15 were ordered, but only 10 completed, as 5 chassis were diverted to the first Stug 3 series. The Ausführung C, 3 Series ZW, produced in 1937 to 1938, 15 units, further modified the suspension into 3 bogies per side and improved drivetrain components. The Ausführung D, 3 Series ZW, produced between 1938 and 1940, 30 units, introduced a redesigned rear hull, a new commander's cupola, and changes to suspension and engine systems. While some sources claim 30 mm armor, German documentation indicates armor remained similar to earlier models, except for the cupola. 5 additional chassis were completed only in October 1940 and later used in Norway during Operation Barbarossa. The first relatively large-scale production variant, Ausführung E, 4th Series ZW, was built from late 1938 to 1939, 96 units. It introduced a completely new torsion bar suspension with 6 paired road wheels per side, a Maybach HL 120TR 300 horsepower engine, a 10-speed Variorex gearbox, improved driver optics, Kugelblende 30 machine gun mount, evacuation hatches, and various structural refinements. Some were later rearmed with 50 mm guns and converted into support vehicles. The Ausführung F 5th Series ZW, produced from September 1939 to October 1940, 435 units, was a minor upgrade with improved cupola protection, lighting, and turret ring protection. Production involved multiple companies including MAN, Henschel, Famo, Mayag, Alket, and Daimler-Benz, with 36 late vehicles effectively matching Ausführung G standard and armed with 50 mm guns. The Ausführung G 6th Series ZW, produced from March 1940 to April 1941, 600 units, introduced numerous incremental improvements including thicker rear armor, 30 mm, turret ventilation, the addition of the Rommel box, wider tracks, 400 mm, and new wheels. It marked the transition from the 37 mm gun to the 50 mm KWK 38 L42, although 103 units retained the older gun initially. This upgrade required turret redesign and reduced coaxial machine guns to 1. Some tanks were built in tropical configuration. The Ausführung H 7th Series ZW, produced from October 1940 to April 1941, 286 units, further increased armor with an additional 30 mm plate on the hull front, total 60 mm, introduced a new turret rear design, 6-speed Maybach SSG 77 gearbox, repositioned return rollers, and increased weight to 21.6 tons. The Ausführung J, produced from March 1941 to May 1942, became the main wartime version with 602 tanks armed with the 50 mm KK-38 L42 and later 951 tanks with the longer KWK 39 L60 gun. Armor was increased to 50 mm on the hull front, and multiple design refinements were introduced, including improved vision devices, air filtration, and structural simplifications. The introduction of the long barrel gun followed combat experience against Soviet tanks, as earlier guns could only penetrate KV tanks at 200 meters, while Soviet tanks could engage effectively at 500 to 1500 meters. The Ausführung L, 519 units, mid-1942, retained the 50 mm gun but added spaced armor, plus 20 mm, redesigned gun mantlet, removal of vision ports, improved cooling systems for tropical use, and increased weight to 22.7 tons. The Ausführung M, 517 units, 1942 to 1943, introduced smoke grenade launchers, removed hull escape hatches to increase ammunition capacity from 84 to 98 rounds, improved deep weighting capability up to 1.3 meters, relocated headlights, and added mounts for spaced armor and anti-aircraft machine guns. The final production variant, Ausführung N, 614 units, 1942 to 1943, was equipped with a short-barreled 75 mm KBK-37 L24 gun, using reused hulls from L and meters variants. It also incorporated a commander's cupola from later Panzer IV variants and reached a combat weight of 23 tons. Additional conversions included 69 rebuilt vehicles and continued production into 1944 through repairs. The Panzer III featured a classical layout with the engine compartment at the rear, the transmission at the front, and the combined fighting and driver's compartment in the center. The crew consisted of 5 men, a driver and radio operator in the hull, and a commander, gunner, and loader in a 3-man turret. The hull was constructed from rolled chrome-nickel steel armor plates with surface hardening, assembled by welding, as well as bolted connections and brackets. On variants Ausführung E through L, escape hatches were located on both sides of the hull above the second and third road wheels. The engine deck contained 4 access hatches, 2 large and 2 small, while the hull floor included service hatches for draining fluids and accessing the engine and transmission. Early variants AD had a single side vision port, while later models EN featured additional observation ports with armored covers and triplex glass. The driver's position in the front hull included a vision block with a triplex glass insert, protected by either a hinged Ausführung AD or sliding Ausführung EN armored cover, along with a binocular periscopic sight, KFF-1 on early models, KFF-2 on later ones. The turret was hexagonal, welded, and centrally mounted. It housed the main gun, a coaxial machine gun, and on early variants with the 37mm gun, 2 machine guns, and a telescopic sight. Observation ports with triplex glass were placed in the gun mantlet and turret sides, though later variants, L to N, reduced their number. Turret rotation was mechanical with dual controls, a removable hand crank for the loader and a hand wheel for the gunner, along with a gear selector for fast or fine rotation. The commander's cupola was located at the rear of the turret roof, initially with a 2-piece hatch and 8 vision slits, Ausführung A to C, later reduced to 5, Ausführung DN. Some late Ausführung N tanks received a redesigned cupola derived from the Panzer IV Ausführung G with a single-piece hatch. Crew access was provided by side turret hatches, which evolved from single-piece to double-door designs, starting with Ausführung E. Vision devices were integrated into the hatches and turret sides, though later variants, L, M, N, removed some of these. The rear of the turret included 2 small ports for firing personal weapons. The Panzer III was armed with a series of progressively more powerful guns, reflecting the rapid evolution of tank warfare. Early variants, Ausführung AG, were equipped with the 3.7 cm KWK L45 gun developed by Rheinmetall Borsig. The barrel length was 45 calibers, 1/717 millimeters, and the gun weighed 195 kilograms. Elevation ranged from -10 degrees to +20 degrees. It used a vertical semi-automatic sliding breech and an electric firing mechanism, with a rate of fire of 15 to 18 rounds per minute. Ammunition included armor-piercing, Panzer grenade, 0.685 kilograms, 745 meters per second, subcaliber, Panzer grenade 40, 0.368 kilograms, 1,020 meters per second, and high explosive, S-bar-GR 18, 0.615 kilograms, 725 meters per second rounds. Ammunition capacity ranged from 121 to 150 rounds, depending on the variant. Later variants, Ausführung GJ, received the more powerful 5 cm KWK 38 L42 gun. It had a barrel length of 42 calibers, 2,100 millimeters, and weighed about 400 kilograms. Elevation remained -10 degrees to +20 degrees. The gun used a vertical sliding breech with semi-automatic cam operation and an electric trigger integrated into the turret traverse control. The recoil system consisted of a hydraulic recoil brake, right side, and a hydropneumatic recuperator, left side. Rate of fire was about 15 rounds per minute. Ammunition included armor-piercing, Panzer grenade 39, 2.06 kilograms, 685 meters per second, subcaliber, Panzer grenade 40, 0.925 kilograms, 1,050 meters per second, and high explosive, S-bar 38, 1.823 kilograms, 450 meters per second rounds. Ammunition load was 97 to 99 rounds. Variants Ausführung JM were equipped with the long-barreled 5 cm KWK 39 L60. The barrel length increased to 60 calibers, 3,000 millimeters, and the gun weighed 435 kilograms. The design was largely identical to the KWK-38, but featured a longer cartridge case, 420mm versus 288mm, resulting in higher velocity. Armor-piercing rounds, Panzer 39, 2.06 kilograms, had a muzzle velocity of 835 meters per second, while sub-caliber rounds, Panzer 40, up to 190 meters per second, significantly improved anti-tank performance. High-explosive rounds, SBRGR 38, had a velocity of 550 meters per second. Ammunition capacity ranged from 84 to 92 rounds. The final production variant, Ausführung N, was armed with the short-barreled 7.5 centimeters KWK-37 L24 gun. The barrel length was 24 calibers, 1765.3 millimeters, and the gun weighed 490 kilograms. Elevation remained minus 10 degrees to plus 20 degrees. It used a vertical sliding breech and electric firing system. Ammunition included armor-piercing, kilograms ROT PZ, 6.8 kilograms, 385 meters per second, shaped charge, 38 HL series, 4.4 to 4.8 kilograms, 450 to 485 meters per second. Smoke NBGR, 6.21 kilograms, 455 meters per second, and high explosive shells, 5.73 kilograms, 450 meters per second. Machine gun armament also evolved. Early variants, AG, had two coaxial 7.92mm MG-34 machine guns, plus one hull-mounted MG-34, with a total ammunition load of 44 and 25 rounds. Later variants, GAM, used one coaxial MG-34 and one hull-mounted MG-34 in a ball mount, Kugelblende 30 or 50. Some late variants, LN, could mount an anti-aircraft MG-34 on the commander's cupola. Ammunition load ranged from 2,700 to 4,950 rounds. The tank was equipped with telescopic sights, TZF-5A for 37mm guns, TZF-5D for the KWK-38, TZF-5E for the KWK-39, and TZF-5B for Ausführung N. All provided 2.4 times magnification. The hull machine gun used a KZF-2 sight with 1.8 times magnification. All Panzer III tanks were equipped with the Fugue 5 radio, mounted above the transmission and to the left of the radio operator. Its operational range was 6.4 kilometers in voice mode and 9.4 kilometers in telegraph mode. Internal crew communication was maintained via an intercom system, TPU, and a light signaling device. All variants were powered by 12-cylinder Maybach gasoline carburetor engines. Early models, Ausführung A-D, used the HL108TR engine with a displacement of 10.8 liters and an output of 250 horsepower. Later variants, Ausführung EN, were equipped with the HL120TR engine with a displacement of 11.9 liters and power output ranging from 300 to 320 horsepower. The latter was a direct development of the former, differing mainly in cylinder diameter and compression ratio. Transmission systems varied significantly between modifications. Ausführung AC used a 5-speed Zahnradfabrik SSG 75 gearbox, plus 5 forward, minus 1 reverse, while Ausführung D used the 6-speed SSG 76, 5 minus 1. Variants Ausführung EG featured the 10-speed Maybach Variorex transmission, plus 10, minus 4, a rare clutchless design with a pneumatic semi-automatic gear shifting mechanism. Later variants, Ausführung HN, used the 6-speed Zahnradfabrik SSG 77, plus 6, minus 1. The steering mechanism was a single-radius planetary system, consisting of 2 identical planetary gear units, one for each track. These units served both as steering mechanisms and as part of the final drive reduction. Each unit had its own steering brake, controlled by 2 levers, each linked to both a steering brake and a track brake. A pedal operated the main braking system. The final drive consisted of 3 reduction stages. The first stage used a bevel gear system to transfer torque from the gearbox to the steering mechanism shaft. The second stage consisted of the differential gear units of the steering system. The third stage used a pair of side-mounted cylindrical final drives. The total gear ratio ranged from 7 to 9, depending on the engine and transmission configuration. The suspension system evolved considerably across variants. All versions shared front drive sprockets, rear idlers, return rollers, and rubber-rimmed road wheels. Ausführung A, spring suspension, 5 large road wheels, 2 return rollers. Ausführung B to D, 8 smaller road wheels with leaf spring suspension. Ausführung B used 2 semi-elliptical springs, while Ausführung C and D used 3, with angled positioning on Ausführung D. Ausführung E to N, torsion bar suspension with 6 medium-sized road wheels, representing the final and most effective configuration. Differences between these variants were mainly in wheel size, rubber tires, and sprocket idler design. As of September 1, 1939, the Wehrmacht had 3 prototypes, ZW1, ZW3, ZW4, 95 out of 110 produced serial Panzer III tanks, and 38 command variants. However, only 87 tanks took part in the invasion of Poland. Most of them, 37 early variants, were concentrated in the 6th Training Tank Battalion attached to the 3rd Panzer Division of General Guderian's 19th Motorized Corps. Compared to Polish tanks, the Panzer III had better armor protection and mobility than the most powerful Polish tank, the 7TP. During the campaign, 26 tanks were irrecoverably lost. By May 10, 1940, German forces fielded 349 Panzer III tanks. At the start of the Western Campaign, the Panzerwaffe had 381 Panzer III tanks in total. After Poland, Germany expanded to 10 Panzer divisions, but most were under strength. A standard Panzer regiment required 54 Panzer III and command variants, meaning 540 tanks were needed across 10 regiments, far exceeding actual numbers. Guderian noted that rearmament with Panzer III and IV progressed very slowly due to limited industrial capacity and decisions by the High Command. As a result, available medium tanks were concentrated in key offensive sectors. In France, the Panzer III proved effective against all French light tanks, but struggled against medium D2 S-35 and heavy B1 bis tanks. The 37mm gun was unable to penetrate their armor. Guderian recalled that even captured French 47mm anti-tank guns failed to penetrate the B1 bis, while German 37mm and 20mm weapons were ineffective, leading to losses. During the campaign, Germany lost 124 Panzer III and 11 command variants. Panzer III units also participated in the Balkans campaign in spring 1941. The main challenges there were mountainous terrain and weak bridges. Engagements with British forces occurred in Greece, particularly near Ptolemeda during the breakthrough of the Metaxas Line. Tanks of the 9th Panzer Division fought the British 3rd Royal Tank Regiment. British A-10 cruiser tanks were largely ineffective against Panzer III, especially Ausführung H variants with 60mm frontal armor and 50mm guns. However, British Royal Horse Artillery using 25-pounder guns destroyed 15 German tanks, including several Panzer III. Despite this, the outcome was unaffected, and on April 28th, British forces abandoned Greece, leaving their tanks behind. In spring 1941, the Panzer III was deployed to the North African theater. On March 11th, units of the 5th Light Division began unloading in Tripoli with 61 Panzer III tanks armed with 50mm guns. 10 tanks were lost at sea with their transports. These were Ausführung G and H variants in tropical trop configuration, equipped with enhanced air filter and cooling systems. 2 months later, they were reinforced by the 15th Panzer Division with 71 additional tanks armed with the 5cm Kelbuke gun. At the time of arrival, the Panzer III outclassed all British tanks in Africa except the Matilda. The first major engagement took place on April 30th, 1941, during the German attack on British positions near Tobruk by the 5th Panzer Regiment. Despite prolonged air preparation, the attack failed. The 2nd Battalion suffered heavy losses, including 24 Panzer III tanks knocked out. However, all damaged tanks were recovered, and 14 were quickly returned to service. Following this, General Erwin Rommel abandoned frontal assaults in favor of flanking maneuvers and encirclements. By late autumn 1941, neither the Panzer III nor the Panzer IV retained their earlier superiority over British tanks. In November 1941, British forces launched an offensive with 748 tanks, including 213 Matilda and Valentine tanks, 220 Crusaders, 150 older cruiser tanks, and 165 American-built Stuarts. Rommel's Africa Corps could oppose them with only 249 operational German tanks, 139 Panzer III, and 146 Italian tanks. In terms of armor and firepower, most British tanks were comparable to or superior to German ones. After 2 months of fighting, British losses reached 278 tanks, while Axis losses were comparable at 292 tanks. The British 8th Army pushed Axis forces back nearly 800 kilometers, but failed to destroy Rommel's forces. On January 5, 1942, a convoy arrived in Tripoli delivering 117 German tanks, mostly Panzer III Ausführung J with 50mm L-42 guns, and 79 Italian tanks. Reinforced, Rommel launched an offensive on January 21st, advancing 120 to 130 kilometers eastward in just 2 days, forcing the British to retreat. Despite lacking both numerical and qualitative superiority, German success was attributed to several factors. According to General von Mellenthin, these included superior anti-tank guns, effective combined arms coordination, and advanced tactical methods. German forces used 88mm anti-aircraft guns against both aircraft and tanks, even though only 35 were available in November 1941. Their 50mm anti-tank guns outperformed British 2-pounders and were deployed alongside tanks. German artillery was also closely integrated with armored units, unlike the British, who treated anti-tank guns as purely defensive weapons and underutilized their field artillery. These principles were also characteristic of German operations on the Eastern Front. At the beginning of 1941, 60 early Panzer III tanks, Ausführung AD, were withdrawn from frontline service and converted into training vehicles, with 5 Ausführung D tanks reassigned to the 40th Special Purpose Panzer Battalion. As of June 1, 1941, the Wehrmacht had 350 Panzer III tanks armed with 37mm guns and 1,090 equipped with 50mm guns. Approximately 65 additional vehicles were undergoing rearmament or major repairs at factories. For the invasion of the Soviet Union, 966 Panzer III tanks were allocated, including 259 with 37mm guns. These were distributed among 11 of the 17 panzer divisions participating in Operation Barbarossa. An additional 30 tanks, including 5 with 37mm guns, served in the 100th and 101st Flamethrower Tank Battalions and in the 40th Special Tank Battalion in Finland. By the beginning of the invasion, the Panzer III had become the primary tank of the German armored forces. In general, the Panzer III proved to be a roughly equal opponent to most Soviet tanks of the early war period. It held a clear advantage over the T-26 in all respects, and was superior to the BT-5 and BT-7 in armor protection, while also being more maneuverable than heavier vehicles like the T-28 and KV tanks. However, in terms of overall combat effectiveness, it was inferior to the T-34. Despite this, the Panzer III possessed several critical advantages, including superior optics and observation equipment, greater mechanical reliability, more advanced communication systems thanks to widespread use of radios, and a well-organized crew structure with clearly defined roles. These factors often compensated for its technical shortcomings and allowed German crews to achieve success in tank engagements. Nevertheless, encounters with the T-34, and especially the KV series, were highly challenging, as the German 50mm gun could penetrate their armor only at very short distances, typically under 300 meters. During the first 6 months of 1941, German forces irrecoverably lost 660 Panzer III tanks, followed by another 338 losses in just the first 2 months of 1942. At the production rates of the time, German industry was unable to quickly replace these losses, leading to a persistent shortage of tanks in panzer divisions. Throughout 1942, the Panzer III remained the backbone of the Panzerwaffe and took part in major operations on the Eastern Front, including the battles of Stalingrad and the Caucasus, as well as in North Africa. The introduction of the longer-barreled 50mm L-60 gun improved its effectiveness, extending the engagement range against tanks such as the T-34 to approximately 500 meters under favorable conditions. Combined with relatively strong frontal armor, this upgrade somewhat increased the tank's combat viability. In North Africa, Panzer III tanks formed the core of Erwin Rommel's armored forces. However, their effectiveness declined with the arrival of American M3 Grant tanks, which were difficult for German guns to penetrate. Following the Axis defeat in Tunisia in May 1943, all remaining Panzer III tanks in that theater were lost. By 1943, the role of the Panzer III began to diminish significantly. The burden of anti-tank combat increasingly shifted to the Panzer IV, particularly versions equipped with long-barreled 75mm guns. Nevertheless, the Panzer III still made up a substantial portion of German armored forces. Its final major engagement occurred during Operation Citadel, the Battle of Kursk, where nearly 1,000 units of various modifications were deployed. After 1943, production of the Panzer III ceased, and surviving vehicles were gradually withdrawn from frontline service. Many were reassigned to training units or deployed in secondary theaters, such as the Balkans and Italy. By November 1944, only slightly more than 200 remained in frontline units. By March 1945, most Panzer III tanks were either in reserve or used for training purposes, with only about 160 still serving in combat units. As a result, the type saw little to no participation in the final battles of the war. According to German records, a total of 4,706 Panzer III tanks were irrecoverably lost between September 1, 1939 and April 10, 1945. In conclusion, the Panzer III was a rather controversial tank. Designed to combat enemy armor, its original 37mm gun quickly became obsolete, and its weak modernization potential, primarily limited by its weak suspension, limited its armament to 50mm, which was clearly insufficient in the second half of the war, leading to the Panzer III's downfall. Perhaps the biggest mistake in its development was the German concept of separating tanks into the anti-tank Panzer III and the support vehicle, the Panzer IV. By the 1940s, the Soviet Union had already embraced the idea of mounting a gun in a single vehicle capable of simultaneously destroying enemy fortifications with a 76mm high-explosive shell and engaging enemy tanks with armor-piercing shells of the same caliber. This gave its T-34 and KV-1 tanks a firepower advantage over the Panzerwaffe's vehicles. Had the Wehrmacht followed a similar path from the start, choosing the Panzer IV with its long-barreled gun as its basis, history might have turned out differently. On the other hand, it's important to remember that German tanks were very expensive compared to Soviet ones, both due to the quality of their construction and the different economies of the two countries. The socialist USSR, with its centrally planned economy, was able to manage all its resources simultaneously, optimizing, reducing costs, and accelerating production. Unlike the imperialist Third Reich, whose industry was in the hands of competing private companies that were primarily concerned with profits rather than victory. For example, Germany spent 30,000 to 50,000 labor hours producing one Panzer III, while one Soviet T-34 required 3,000 to 10. Simply put, for every one German Panzer III, Soviet factories produced 5 to 10 T-34s. Therefore, as a war machine for which a balance of combat performance and production is crucial, the Panzer III, as well as the Panzer IV, are clearly inferior to Soviet medium tanks. However, the tank itself was extremely comfortable for the crew in every respect, much more comfortable than its Soviet counterparts. The Panzer III could have been an excellent vehicle for local wars, where quality, not quantity, is decisive. Overall, it can be said that the Panzer III was a Blitzkrieg vehicle, a lightning-fast, fleeting war where victory is achieved through swift and powerful strikes. But it proved a loser in the total war that became World War II.